The president says I don't have to wear my mask, but my employer says I do. So what now? This is stuff employers should know.
Welcome to Stuff Employers Should Know, proudly brought to you by LabourNet, management's ultimate HR solution.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Barry Gordon-Davis, and not with me, but on my screen is Yes Like It Ismail. We have in a remote broadcast. He's sitting in studio, and I'm sitting in my home studio, if you want to call it that, for logistical reasons. So this is going to be one of those stuff employers should know sessions where we literally are doing one question, one answer.
So Barry, we've been getting an influx of questions in our inbox regarding the lifting of the mandatory mask wearing policy. Although a lot of the questions revolve around the fact that some or many employers still have a mandatory mask wearing policy within their workspace. And also it forms part of their risk assessment. So how do employers and employees deal with this situation?
Yeah, and quite right. So the moment they lifted the national state of disaster, then obviously the regulations and the previous directions ceased to have legal effect. So effectively on the 24th of June, the Minister of Employment and Labour released a Code of Good Practice, and it's referred to as the Code of Good Practice of Managing Exposure to SARS CoV-2 in the Workplace 2022. So this is the Code of Good Practice that we can probably see is going to be going on for the foreseeable future. And to answer your question directly, we're getting these questions of, well, I have, when it was mandatory to wear masks and the risk assessments were done by employers, and even if your risk, no matter what the outcome of your risk assessment was, because it was mandatory in all places to wear masks or in gatherings and stuff, we had to. But now as the risk assessment of the employer, the outcome was that, employees, to try and prevent the spread of COVID, would wear masks in the workplace or in offices or in common shared workspaces. What happens to these risk assessments and these policies that have now been produced by employers in this regard? And the simple answer is, and this is where the Code of Good Practice comes in, is that they're saying that, COVID hasn't gone anywhere. It's still around. And for the purposes of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, this Code of Good Practice really does still apply. And it still requires employers to have a risk assessment if they haven't already done one, or to revise their risk assessment with regards to curbing the spread of COVID, which hasn't mysteriously disappeared. So at the end of the day, the employer's risk assessment, which determines what it wants to do or how it feels necessary to curb the spread of COVID within the workplace, they have the prerogative to implement a policy that compels employees to continue wearing a mask. So employees can't rely on the fact that we call it the president has said no more masks are required. They can't use that as an excuse. And if they are refusing to wear a mask in the workplace, they might find themselves in breach of the company's occupational health and safety policy or COVID policy, or wherever the provision is then contained. So I think, long story short, yes, employers can still compel you to wear masks. That includes visitors, that includes anybody into the business. It is the employer's prerogative to make the rules and to abide by their own rules and to enforce their rules.
Barry, based on what you've said, am I understanding you correctly that it is the employer's prerogative as to whether or not they want to continue enforcing the mandatory mask wearing policy, as well as keep it as part of their risk assessment?
100%. So employers can decide whether they want to continue with masks or not. But we have to obviously be mindful that if you say that masks are no longer required in the workplace, this might contradict your initial risk assessment. And it might then have to be revised so that your policy then matches up to your actual practices within the workplace. So that's it for this very brief, unmasked episode of Stuff Employers Should Know. As always, if you want to get in touch, drop us an email at sesk@labournet.com or hit us up on any of the social medias. Until the next episode, stay safe in whichever way you choose or which your employer chooses. From myself and Yas, who is no longer masked, but definitely far away from me, cheers.
Stuff Employers Should Know was proudly brought to you by LabourNet, management's ultimate HR solution. For more episodes from Stuff Employers Should Know, go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you play your favorite shows. Case law or statutes referenced in the podcast are current at the time of recording.